Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday night STEP series. My name is Ray, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Ray.
Would you kindly silence your cell phones in respect for the meeting? So let's welcome Peter, please.
My name is Peter. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober, part of a sacred place called Alcoholics Anonymous. And first things first, thank Ray and the group for having me here to share with you over the next few weeks my experience and hope on what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, living life on self-will, the spiritual transformation as a result of this big book and where I am currently and what I'm doing currently to grow in understanding and effectiveness. June 23rd, 1988 was my separation from alcohol, and I'm here tonight as a recovered alcoholic. As I said many times, I don't say recovered to separate myself from anyone or be different, special, or unique. It's just my truth. It is the first promise in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I get to bear witness for others what it's like living in the world of the spirit and being recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, as well as the isms that accompany alcoholism. So I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be home. I was visiting family up north, and I forgot how cold it gets up there, and I'm a coward when it comes to that. Just a quick story before we get going. I have this thing that God moved me to years ago, maybe before I got down here, actually. So it's over 5 years ago. This thing for homeless folks. And I've always been puzzled why people just walk past them and look down upon them, as I did when I was out there. And in early sobriety, I was drawn to them, but I wouldn't pay too much attention. And one of my prayers I work with is asking God to allow me to serve Him. And if I'm a slave to the world, I can't serve God. And being a slave to the world is listening to what everyone else tells you to do and trying to fit in with the masses and forgetting that the road I've been set on is a very narrow road and a very narrow gate to walk through. And God, when the ground is fertile, gives you work to do. And I started just spending time giving them money and going into a store and getting a sandwich and like that. And it got moved to, when, as long as I'm not in harm's way, to ask them their name and share with them my name. And something incredibly happens when you have someone who's out in the streets who at one time was mama's little boy or girl. And that baby was the most important baby in the neighborhood. And I always wondered what happened. And they go beyond where we are, because some of them have psych issues and some of them don't. And I don't know what is more painful, knowing where you are or being oblivious to where you are, but there they are. And I would stop and ask them their name and try to talk to them as best I can and give them some dignity and respect, because what I do to the least of them, I do to Him. And my sponsor says, how do you know that that's not God in human form, just seeing how you're doing? While you're talking the big book and talking about prayers, and he just happened to show up and say, okay, Pete, let's see what you really got. If we want to know what our belief systems are, we take a look at our actions. And the best sermon I can give you is my actions, not the words I say. And so I get to New York, and Mary and I do this, and I spent way too much money, not on gifts, just giving it to these homeless folks. And while we were doing it, this one woman showed up with a big duffel bag of food for this person. And so as we're shopping and going about our business, I'm stopping and talking to some of these folks. And you put that out into the universe. Now, I remember one of my sponsors, Mark H., says, whatever you put into the universe, God will reward you in abundance. But that's not why you do it. It's just who we be now. And so I'm doing this, and on Saturday evening, after dinner with the family, we go to St. Patrick's for midnight mass. And it was pretty ominous looking at the outside of this gorgeous church, because the police were in lock and load because of threats, and they were with AK-47s or whatever the heck they were carrying. And so we had to walk all the way around up to Madison Avenue and up, and we find out you need tickets to get to midnight mass. And there were no more tickets. And as soon as we said, well, what do we do if there's no tickets? This woman who was right in front of us says, I have 2 extra tickets. Merry Christmas. And if the timing was 1 second later, we would have missed her. And so we walked in like to this VIP thing. I mean, I thought I was important for about 2 minutes. And the security's escorting us in, and I was maybe, 10 rows from the altar for midnight mass. And I just couldn't believe that happened. And as I sat in prayer before mass started, because there was lots of singing, why would I be surprised? And why am I be surprised at God's doing? It's when you're a novice with God, it's, oh my God, what a miracle. But after a while, it's just what God does. You take care of his kids, and he will take care of you. And only he knew how important it was for me to sit in midnight mass. And it wasn't, I'm not a once-a-year mass guy. I go every Sunday. And it was important for me to be there and to celebrate, for me, the birth of my God. And there we were. And it turned out to be this just wonderful evening. And we sat there for the hour. It was an hour and a half mass, just blown away, not by only what was happening in front of us and the camaraderie in this place. It was absolutely spectacular. But the gift we got on the way in, totally unexpected, for just chopping wood and carrying water. And it's really important for me to always be centered with my God, whether I'm in New York, whether I'm in Montana, whether I'm right here on a Tuesday night, the principles are the same, even though I might be different situations in different affairs. And once we align ourselves with God's will, it's really difficult to get out of line with God's will. And I don't take over, and I don't put my hands on the wheel, and I really make up my own rules as I go along, because I know about the consequences. And so I was just taking care of God's kids for fun and for free, not expecting any kind of applause, which is what the chopping wood and carrying water is partly about. Doing God's work, doing the work, getting in the field, plowing the field, doing labor, and getting blisters on your hand and such, and without anyone seeing, without applause, and not telling anyone about it, just what you do. So I'm very grateful for that. Now, it's a far cry from where I was in 1988. And prior to 1988, where when the book says on page 62, selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, that's me. Selfish and self-centeredness. And what happens as a result of this work, we stop thinking about ourselves and stop thinking for others. There's another story that kind of illustrates this. About a week and a half ago, I was with someone I sponsor, someone close to me as well, and we purchased something off of him. And so we paid him for these goods. And so he has this little wad of money, and he goes to an afternoon meeting. And prior to purchasing this thing, Marion says, there's something about this that we're supposed to buy this. It's okay. So we buy it. And Dave's at a meeting, and there's a gentleman there down on his luck. And without going through all the details, he could have used some financial assistance. And this very same money that I bought something from Dave with, Dave paid, pay it forward, and gave it to this guy to help him out of his difficult times. And these are the things that happen in the world of the Spirit. No one had to remind Dave to do that. No one had to remind me to do what Mary and I were doing. It's just living in the world of the Spirit. Well, I'm not trying to get something from someone so I look good. I'm not angling in on someone. I'm not taking advantage of someone who's vulnerable and weak. I'm not making rules up as I go along. That's having God manage our life, which is a huge contrast to when we were managing our life, or as we can manage or try to manage our life in sobriety. And step one tells me that I'm an alcoholic, cannot manage my own life. I'm powerless over alcohol, and my life was unmanageable. That's drunk or sober. And so I got real clear on that the hard way coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, and through some trials and tribulations of trying to run the show my own way a few times in early recovery, where I was met with a sledgehammer. I stopped doing that. And somehow, in being disciplined to a spiritual life, I find an awful lot of freedom and leadway in that. In discipline, there's a tremendous amount of freedom. So I have a life life, when our book talks about a life which demands rigorous honesty, I'm not saying I'm a saint or anything like that. I make a ton of mistakes, but I'm pretty transparent with people who are close to me. And I'm very transparent with my sponsor, because I know what happens to the illness, how it grows with lies, how it grows with secrets, how it grows with sins of omission. And once I step into that, once I begin to lie in any area of my life, it corrodes the ability for me to see the truth in every other area of my life. And I've stepped into managing my life, and now I'm a liar. If I lie once, I am a liar. My ego says, well, I only lied one time. No, you are a liar, Peter. And so I'm very aware of that. And the only way I can pull off living a life which demands rigorous honesty is a complete surrender to my God. So when I look in the mirror, the guy looking back isn't calling the guy looking in the mirror a fraud anymore. A lot of cracks in the armor. A lot of flaws in the character makeup. I'm flawed. Something in another book says I'm weak flesh sold unto the slavery of sin. I mean, I'm just sinful. That's my way. Now, God could have removed that piece from me, but why would I need God then? But what I get to do with that, and sometimes on my best day, the best gift I can give God is my sinfulness. But that's what I do. I surrender that. And through that, and obviously working these steps to have closeness to God, not proximity, but more awake with God, somehow I find myself disciplined to the spiritual life. And not only am I not thinking about drinking or any other substance or doing things that are unspiritual, trying to convince myself they are spiritual, there's no thought of that stuff going on anymore. We enter the world of the Spirit, and we don't rise above our alcoholism. I don't rise above the next alcoholic. We just enter the world of the Spirit, where that stuff, that underbelly stuff, doesn't have its claws in me anymore. A day at a time. Because my book says we get a daily reprieve, a stage execution, a day at a time. Part of looking at step one, and I see this a lot when I sponsor people in the business I'm in. I sit down with lots of brand new folks, and most of us, and I was one of them, are under the delusion that we had relationships with people. You know, we raise our kids. I did the best I could with my kids, or I did the best I could with my spouse, and we're under the delusion that we had some sort of relationship, even with our coworkers. And all that does is prolong the delusion that I'm not alcoholic. What I had to get really clear on when I looked at step one is I had no relationships. They all suffered. There were no relationships. The only relationship I had was with a whiskey bottle, which meant nothing else really mattered. So whether we had kids, a spouse, parents, there was no relationship, because if it meant seeing them or getting what I needed, I got what I needed, and I'll worry about that stuff later. And I had to get really clear that even the relationships with my brothers and my dad, who were near and dear to me, when I was using, I had no relation. I was never there for them, even though my body was there. Even though I was talking to them, I was never there. There was no relationship. And if I can crawl inside of them and see what they were looking at, it was someone who was sick, suffering, unreliable, irresponsible, and probably going to steal us, rob from us by the end of the night. That is not a relationship. We don't want to fly over people like that nowadays. But it took me a long time to get really clear. It just kept deluding myself, well, I was a good older brother. No, I was not. I was a terrible older brother. I wasn't even a brother to my kid brothers. I wasn't even a son to my dad. And it went on and on and on throughout my family. That took a long time for me to get. And I got it in 1988 outside the Port Authority, where I realized that I have no family. And it took me longer to realize that they didn't leave me. I walked away. Because what I was chasing was my master, and that was a whiskey bottle. And that came before anything. That is complete unmanageability in my life. And what we can get while we're sober is the same sort of behavior. Although I'm not chasing a whiskey bottle, or I'm not chasing any non-conference approved dry goods, I am chasing her. I am chasing him. I am chasing money. I am chasing something other than God. And when I do that, that becomes my master. I'm chasing my image. my vanity, whatever it might be. It is just not God. And if I'm not seeking God, I am nowhere. What I'm doing is seeking a drink. And my ego won't tell me that. Anything that blocks me from God is giving me a direct route to another drink. I mean, that's just the way it goes. But I did delude ourselves into thinking I'm not that bad, I'm okay. I got step one. I pray I never get to a place that I say, I got step one. Because that thing is just dormant, just laying in the corner, sleeping. It doesn't take much to wake up that monster. One drink and I buy back the entire show. The nightmare, the degradation and humiliation. And that means whether we come from Park Avenue or Park Bench. So we really need to get a gut check before we even consider step two. Where am I with step one? Whether I'm sober one day or I'm sitting in here with 30 years sober. What does step one currently look like in my life? Rehab doesn't put a dent in step one. Going to meetings doesn't put a step in dent one. My experience out there coming in here is my step one. What we do is we learn about what we suffer from in step one with 43 pages in a book that paints us into a corner and slams us against the wall. Am I convinced now? We have a chapter called More about alcoholism. As Joe and Charlie would say, if you didn't get it by now, maybe now you will. 43 pages. Our book says the more hopeless we feel, the better. I really need to feel like there's no more rungs in the ladder before I even become teachable to even consider looking at step two. Because if I think I can get away with just a little bit, I have some wiggle room, why am I about to look at this God, the solution, to restore me to wholeness of mind, which means I'm about to turn my whole life over to God, and my life is none of my business. Not if I still got one finger in there. Ain't going to do it. I need to be reduced to nothing. And that has to happen to many of us. I'm one of them in sobriety. I think I shared last week on December 22nd, 1988, in AA. 1 foot in the program, if you will, 1 foot in the fellowship. I got really thirsty and almost got drunk. And only divine intervention got in the way of me and a drink. I was not spiritually fit. I was just running on God's grace. What I'm happy to report to you is the good news that there's a difference between getting God's grace and having a relationship with that power that gives us grace. That requires some labor on my part, a lot of chopping wood and carrying water, and willing to look at my own demons, willing to look at my own defects, willing to look at me, flaws and all, which step 4 demands I do. So my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, I love the fellowship. If anyone walks with me, they know how much this is near and dear to me, and how I try to bring dignity and respect to a sacred place called Alcoholics Anonymous. But I'm also really clear that my meetings alone are not always going to give me truth. And my meetings alone are not always going to give me God. And my meetings alone are not going to point out my defects and the inner workings of my mind. What will happen when I get a sponsor and begin working through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? That stuff will meet me. The same way as we go through the steps, God will meet us. And then we find out He's been walking with us all along, but what was in the way was me. So I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with lots of ideas and conceptions and attitudes about God and Alcoholics Anonymous, all my truth. And I ran on that truth, all false beliefs. And we find out that the truth is true until we find out it no longer isn't. In order to experience the truth, the false must die. And that's what AA will do. If we have a sponsor going through the 12 steps, just me going to meetings, that's not going to happen. I look for new drunks now. I see friends. There's a sacred fellowship. There's a fellowship of the Spirit, and the Spirit within the fellowship is part of my lifeline. But there's 2 other sides to my triangle, to our triangle, that I need to be immersed in. And meeting makers get loaded. Some meeting makers make it. Usually the hard drinker. The real alcoholic, we keep relapsing. And why do we keep relapsing? Because I have a step 1 problem. Because at some point on the journey of recovery, I begin to run the show. It's okay to 13 step. Why not? So what? What's the big deal? My sponsor said don't do it, but I'm different. I just leaped into a pint of vodka. It's okay not to go to a meeting. Why not? I'm feeling good. I just jumped into a pound of cocaine. I mean, my mind doesn't tell me that, but that's exactly what I'm doing. Because sooner or later, if I ain't doing this work, this illness is going to find me and I will get hijacked. And I can't even see it coming. On my way to a meeting on Tuesday night, I find myself a few blocks from here doing what I'm not supposed to be doing. Or I'm in some gin mill on A1A somewhere. Wait a minute, I was going to the Tuesday night meeting. How did I get here? Well, it's too late now. I'll figure it out tomorrow. Plus, I'll get a white chip and everyone give me a standing ovation for wrecking my life again. That one I don't get. I was in New York for a couple of days. I'm pissed off. It's unbelievable how my own family talks. I forgot how hey, Merry Christmas, how you doing? It's not a Hallmark card when you meet my family. It's like a scene out of The Sopranos. I couldn't believe it. I found my first sponsor in Brooklyn, my first real sponsor. I was working with someone in Minnesota when I was out there, but my first real sponsor was in Brooklyn. And I wouldn't say it was a rude awakening, but he was very rude at times to me. And because he knew my illness had me in its grip. And he wasn't about to play nice with my addiction. Because my addiction was not playing nice with me nor my family. And so he would get right up in my face and just read me the riot act and just basically cut me to shreds on many nights. And I hated when he did it, but I love him today for doing that. And he gave me a really clear understanding of exactly what I'm up against. There's a great phrase one of my sponsors always told me is, discipline is the horse I ride. I never had discipline. And this gentleman showed me about discipline. Of praying at least twice a day, and so on, and doing inventory, being accountable to a sponsor. And I really got to learn about step one. And all I had to do was look at my experience of in and out of treatment centers, my experience of all the years of drinking alcoholically and using other non-conference approved dry goods, and I got a real good idea of relating what the book said to my experience. It came alive for me. That's me, I drink like that. That once I start, I can't stop. And even though I don't want to drink, I continue to drink. And then I had to look at the behavior that accompanies alcoholism, how unspiritual it was. That the main problem for me centered in the mind, not the body. Because I'm not drinking doesn't mean I'm much better. It just means I've time away from the last drink. Which is really scary, because the more time we have away from a drink and we pick up, all that time comes back to haunt us. It's as if we've been drinking all along. God forbid if I was to pick up a drink, I'd be looking like I've been drinking for the last 28 years. Tomorrow morning you pull me out of a dumpster, suit and all, because I go, boom, I blow up. Because the illness just doesn't care. I had to learn about that stuff. My 9 weeks in a treatment center, and I get drunk 2 days after 9 weeks in treatment, and you would think I never went to treatment before. So 43 pages talk to me about step one. And once I'm convinced that I'm alcoholic, cannot manage my own life, drunk or sober, and that no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism, God could and would if he was sought. Step two talked about this pointer. The GPS is on, that I go from here to there. Do I want to go there? Do I want to experience this God that's going to restore me to sanity, wholeness of mind? And not only with the drink, although at the beginning it was just a drink. Please take this obsession away from me. One of the prayers I work with, God, please take the thought, obsession, compulsion, the drink away from me, because it was on me all the time. It would leave and then come back again. If I would smell liquor, my stomach would flip. I remember being in treatment, and we had family week, and the family would come down, and you got a day pass. And my dad and his wife took me out to dinner, and they took me to some really nice place in Minneapolis. And we walked in, the bar was like 30 feet long, and I just scanned the entire bar. I spotted the Jack Daniels. Oh my God, my mouth is watering. I couldn't eat. My stomach flipped. I'm in treatment, I'm not using, my body's not in craving, but my mind says a double would be nice right now. Then you can have nice dinner with your family, and it was on. And the mind is so powerful that although my body doesn't crave, it feels like it's craving. It feels like it's in the allergy cycle. I need a drink. No, I don't. My mind says, yeah, you do. Make sense? Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore us to sanity. Why am I being restored to sanity in the first place? Because I must be insane. And it isn't the things I did when I was drinking, getting in trouble, getting in fights, and all of that nonsense. It's walking out of a treatment center after 9 weeks, stone cold sober, and my mind says you need a drink, and I buy the lie, and the truth gets me all the time. It's having sober time and picking up a drink again. It's swearing I'm not going to cheat on my husband and wife, and there we are again. I'm not going to steal, and there I am again, repeating the same thing over, expecting different results. That's a form of insanity for us, and only God can restore me to wholeness of mind. This sanity, truth, wholeness of mind, God, for me, all those words are interchangeable. Once I get a relationship with God, I don't have insane thinking. Once I experience truth, and the only truth is God, I don't have insane thinking. Once I have wholeness of mind because my mind was broken, I'm not drinking. Am I willing to do this walk? And when it says, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, it's this arrival. Sometimes quickly for some, sometimes slowly. But it's an arrival point that I'm going to get to this place where only this power is going to restore me to wholeness of mind, sanity. And this is where I start to run into trouble. Not willingly, but it was just one of the obstacles in my path. Because I would see some of the old timers talk about their higher power, their God. And they were so sure of it, and it had depth and weight, and it was alive in their life. And I wanted what they had to offer. In chapter 2, Agnostics, it says, I wish I can believe as that man believes. I wanted that, but I had my own obstacles. My obstacles with God was, why did he make me alcoholic? Why did he take my mom? And it went on and on and on, fill in the blank. Why did God do this and not what I think he should have done? So I had the problem with God. Our big book says we watch the new man, his hope rise when we talk about our fellowship, and then it falls when we touch the subject of God. That difficulty arises within us when we talk about God. I see it all the time. And what was made abundantly clear to me, it's my difficulty with God. God has no difficulty with me nor us. And why do I have a difficult time with God? It's based on old ideas, perceptions, and conceptions about God. And I kept assigning God a role. And it was all self-serving. God should be doing this to make my life easier. God should be favoring these people and not those people to make my life easier. God should be giving me an abundance to make my life easier. I don't care about anyone else. That's not a God. God doesn't like you more than me or me more than you. That's not how God operates. What I've come to experience about this God, no matter what I put together in my head about God, it is not God. In fact, anything I come up with in my mind about God is not God. And I can't understand how God works because our big book tells us we can't. I can't comprehend that or define that power which is God. What I can do is experience it. And I got into trying to figure out this God. Try to think like God thinks. And I can't. Because that distance is like the earth to the heavens. God works on his own calendar, in his own way, and many of the things that God does looks very illogical to the way I think. It doesn't look logical. It doesn't make sense. And I'm trying to make sense of God. And I would question, why did I linger in the streets so long? And I forget the point. I would forget the fact that I'm sitting now in AA sober. I discount that and focus on the other stuff. What I'm happy to report to you is all of those things got me here tonight. Every one of them. All of those things made me much more useful in serving Alcoholics Anonymous, in serving a drunk, and of all things, serving my God. So it came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I had to rely upon a GOD at the beginning. I was met on June 23rd, 1988 with one GOD, the gift of desperation. And then I relied upon a GOD, a group of drunks for good orderly direction. It worked for me at the beginning. Our own conception of this God, if you're new or if you're here and struggling, no matter how inadequate, was sufficient. You don't even need a religious deity. AA doesn't ask you to do that. What they're really interested in is our willingness to believe in something other than what we've been doing. That's the mustard seed that'll move a mountain. Am I willing to live by someone else's rules other than my own? How willing am I? And I can say I'm willing, but that's going to show up in my actions. So for me, it was a group of drunks for good orderly direction. And I would go to meetings in Brooklyn, and I'd try to sit near the old-timers. Just to get around them, just to hear what they were saying. I felt safe sitting next to them because I didn't want to sit next to the knuckleheads like me, because you can tell how good I'm doing by the company I keep. I'm hanging around with guys who are going in and out like a door in a storm, back and forth, back and forth. I don't need that. I need Joe with his 30 years, grumpy and all. I need someone who goes home to his wife every night, not someone who's going nightclubbing. I need someone who's all in, so I would sit with these men. It was my GOD. And then I found my sponsor, and we began working through this book. Even he was a GOD for a while. Anything this man told me I was doing. I was following direction, even though every fiber in my being said, he needs a sponsor, he's crazy. But I would do it. And I would follow directions. I was hanging with some guys. They were sober longer than I was. And they saw what God had me doing, writing inventory every night, going home and praying. And they would go to a meeting, go out to dinner, and they would say, you coming? I said, no, I have an assignment to do out of the big book. And they said, are you crazy? It's Friday. We're all going out. As my sponsor said to do this assignment tonight, they all mocked me and made fun of me. They all got drunk. Some are not alive. I'm giving this talk. So I'm very grateful for what God did for me. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. That GOD became a God personal to me. And I'll just share this with you. My journey to where I am right now, currently with my God. I'm a Catholic, so you got an idea who I was praying to. And I didn't have a problem with the carpenter. I just had a problem with the establishment that surrounded it. And so the search began, but there was a willingness within me to seek. And I was going to non-denominational places. I was going to Christian service. I got into Buddhism for a while. I got into all these little things to try to lock into something and get some traction. And God was very patient with me. I needed to be patient with Him as I was doing this 360, really. And I landed back home with a new set of ideas and conceptions about my God, an awake relationship. But I was seeking all the time and doing the work out of this big book. We can take a look at our current agnosticism, meaning I believe there's a God out there, you just can't prove the existence of it. How many of us operate? We pray to God, but when it hits the fan, I'm into self-reliance. I pray on my knees, and as soon as I get up, I figure something out on my own. And anytime I'm in fear, it's because I snap right back into self-reliance. Anytime things are going awry, it's because I'm back in self-reliance. Which means my life's unmanageable, which means I'm in fear, which means I'm in self-reliance, and it's a vicious cycle. And I can't figure it out, so I press some more and try to figure out why I can't figure it out, and I try to figure out why I can't figure it out to figure out why I can't figure it out, and I'm in this mess. Rather than, God, please help. So my own conception, no matter how inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach. There was a gentleman in Brooklyn, this guy Jim L. And I would just want to talk to him because he had God in his eyes. And I would wonder how he did that. What book did he read? What meeting did he go to? And what I found out was he had experience with the steps, but he wasn't a step guy. What he did have was a really tremendous relationship with God. And what he did was he carried a vision of God's will into all his activities. And why I say that, I know a lot of folks who are struggling with God, but they can recite the big book to you. They can't stay sober a long time, but they can recite the big book to you. And they're wondering, maybe I need more effort. Maybe I need to try harder. And sometimes it's from too much of that and not stopping and taking this information and going to practice it. And I learned that. My own conception, no matter how inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach. How willing was I? On page 45, it says, to one who feels he's an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But continue as we are means disaster, especially for alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis are not easy alternatives to face. So what do? I want to believe in God, but I have things in my way. I'm agnostic. And so a great assignment that I was given many times is write on a sheet of paper where I believe God's working in my life. Well, I'm clean and sober, and I'm healthy. Then I write down where I believe God isn't working in my life. My relationships, my money, maybe my health, maybe my career. I don't see God working. I'm still struggling in these areas. And I have fear in those areas. That's my current agnosticism, that I haven't surrendered that. I still have my hands on the steering wheel, where I believe God's working in my life and where I believe He isn't. What do I hold on to right now that I'm afraid to release to God? Oh, I'm spiritual, but don't touch my money. And if spirituality doesn't touch every area of my life, it touches none of my life. This sword of God, if you will, has to go permeate all the way through, not just the surface. So I would look at things. Well, I'm not afraid of turning my drinking over to God or my substance problem over to God. But I'm afraid to turn my money over to God and my career because maybe I wind up working in the Salvation Army. Maybe I wind up working in a soup kitchen, which is very admirable work. Maybe I'm not going to have a lot of money. Maybe I'll just be a guy who's going to make it from week to week. But I'm living in the sunlight of the Spirit. Who cares at that point? I can't worship God and money. You can't do it. But I would do this assignment and take a real good look at what I was afraid to turn over to God and why I was afraid to turn this stuff over to God. And in those areas, I was totally unmanageable. And I kept repeating the same thing over, expecting different results. I was agnostic, using self-reliance. I was in fear and unmanageability. The vicious cycle while I'm getting chips in AA. And telling people I believe in God. No, I don't. I'm a believer. No, you're not. Let's see when the chips are down how much of a believer we are. And do I really believe God's going to take me to a better place? If I'm willing to do that walk, we look at step 3. Now, step 2 in chapter 2, Agnostics, tells me how to find God. I was searching. God's got to be somewhere. Go to my religious community. Go to more meetings. Do something. And all I had to do was lay aside prejudice and express a willingness to believe in this powerful God. Lay aside my old ideas, my preconceived ideas, my judgments about God. I can clean up a drunk who's drinking and doesn't smell good, doesn't look good, and go there with an open mind. When it came to God, I would snap shut. Because I was still viewing God with old ideas. And my book says, we beg you to lay aside prayer. Just for a moment, just lay it aside. They didn't even tell us that my old ideas about God were wrong. They just say, just put it aside for a moment. And where do I find God? Not out there. The kingdom of heaven is within. Someone else said that. And our book says the journey's in. The great reality, another way of Bill saying God, was deep down within every one of us, not just the folks in AA. So the crackhead and the dope fiend and the drunk who's under a bridge tonight, he or she has just as much God in them, like those homeless people in New York have just as much God in them as we do tonight. The difference is the integration and no more separateness with this power. It blows my mind. It makes me incredibly grateful, and I want to hold on to my AA chair a little bit tighter, that after wrecking my life and many other lives, that I come into Alcoholics Anonymous and I'm given a leg up on life. I'm given a head start because of the tools we get to experience in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. And the sacred fellowship that says, this is how you do it. Where a lot of folks out there are clueless on how to do it. That doesn't make sense. But the great reality is deep down within. And here's something I had to consider. All new learning lessons when I was new. If the great reality is deep down within me, Big Book telling me that God is deep down within me. In my very worst moment and in my very best moment, God is God. And I can't get outside of God's world. I can't be separate from that power which I already am, which we already are. If I'm angry with people, if I'm judging people, and you have the great reality of God within you, aren't I now blocked from God? That spirit? If I'm resentful to you three guys, I just took 3 steps back from God, if you will. And when we look at our inventory in step 4, we have 50, 100, 200 people on there with multiple resentments, and we're wondering why we just can't get traction in Alcoholics Anonymous. We can't get traction in the world of the Spirit because I am so blocked from God. Now, there's no proximity when it comes to God, but there is a huge feeling of separateness. I can't lock in because I'm running around resentful at people, at their God, which is my God, which is our God. So I willingly put a wedge between me and the very same power that I'm begging to help me with. And that's why new folks say, I can't hear God. Well, how could you? You're 10 miles away from Him. And Joe, who's been going through the steps regularly, relies on that godly voice. No better or no worse than you, just an integration with God. Does that make sense? So for me, the remedy of just going to meetings, and I speak for myself, wonderful. I love being here. If you know me, I'm in AA. I'm right in the middle of this thing. But that's not going to treat the isms. It's a Band-Aid on an open wound. We share the common problem. In some places, we share the common solution. We meet together, shoulder to shoulder. But then we go home with all of those isms. That instead of going home, my car doesn't go left, it goes right. Or I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm just coming back, and texting is more important than participating in the meeting. There's a problem. I got a first step problem because this isn't that important. And who do you think's running my life? Because my text message is so important that maybe I can't see Joe, who's back for the 15th time and he's busted up, and maybe I'm supposed to pay attention to him and go talk to him. But I'm texting about where we're going to dinner or some nonsense. Which means if you're texting, 45 other people are annoyed by you because they're paying attention to you. That's a first step problem. And I'm not really looking for God. What I am looking for is some instant gratification. Walk into a meeting, get clean, feel good, some camaraderie, walk out the door, go back to doing what I was doing again. That's insanity. Which means a drink is moving closer and I can't even see it coming. It's going to ambush me at any minute. I don't want to be ambushed anymore. And why should I find this power? Agnostics tells me why. When I see other people solving their problems upon a simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe, I had to stop doubting the power of God. So I come and I say, what are you doing? How did you get to where you are? And you tell me it's because of God. Well, how'd you get God? Through the 12 steps you want me to take you. I can't deny my eyes are seeing. Conversely, if you're acting like a drunken sailor, I don't even want to be around you. Which really puts a lot of responsibility on all of us to walk the walk now, doesn't it? Because we don't know who's watching us. And coming in here might be looking good, dying on the inside, hoping that there's a solution in here. They should get a solution in here about how this God brought us back from the pit. And here I am out in the parking lot trying to get something. Huge responsibility. So agnostics tells me how, where, and why to find God. I wrote down my old conception of God. One of the assignments my sponsor gave me, write down your old conception of God. And that was the one I grew up with. And it wasn't a terrible God because my mom told me growing up that God loves me. And every Christmas we had toys. And every birthday I had a gift. And every time I got a good grade or made a good class, my dad or mom would reward me with something. And my mom taught me how to pray and took me to my Catholic church. But around 10, 11, 12, 13, she died when I was 14, that story changed drastically. Now God was cruel. God was evil. I didn't want any part of this God. So I had these 2 chapters in my old conception of God. And that continued into my using days, where I despised God. And I wrote down my current conception of God. That was when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I still do this assignment. Where am I currently with God? And it was starting to change. Remember, the first assignment was the AA fellowship. That was my God. Then became a God personal to me. One that I pray to, depend on, loving, not sure if I trust it yet. And how, the other piece of this assignment was how I would like to see this God in the future with me. My sponsor created a God. And it was this loving, caring parent who would guide me, who would teach me, that I can go to, can tell anything, and never be judged. That came to fruition on the journey back to my carpenter. Completely revolutionized my entire life. And that's what I do today. And each time I go through the steps with my sponsor, we take a look at 1, 2, and 3. Where am I currently? And a great assignment I do now is take a look at my bedevilments on page 52, any agnosticism I got going on. And any agnosticism means I have a roadblock between me and God right now. I'm using self to overcome self. So step 2 is about getting to this place of wholeness of mind, of sanity, where I'm not even thinking about a drink. The obsession is long gone. And what my big book does for us, in step 10, it tells me sanity has returned. They don't just throw a statement out there and let it into the universe. In step 10, as a result of 4 through 9, in step 10, as we enter the world of the Spirit, it says sanity has returned. The problem has been removed. I don't have to think the drink through, play the tape to the end, remember I come from, but keep it green, because that's futile if you're a real alcoholic. But God will do this for us. We are now in a relationship with God. So the big book puts something out there, this pointer, to get to this power greater than myself. And as a result of the chopping wood and carrying water, we enter the world of the Spirit, and God reveals Himself, and I'm given a new mind. This transformation within. And that my unmanageability is always within, never outside. And God gets to heal that as I die to self. And the less of me, the more God. And this mind gets revolutionized. We start to see with different eyes. We start to hear with different ears. Our words are godly, and our actions show that. I can't do this on my own. How could we? I don't have the endurance to do something like that, let alone the courage, strength, or the direction. But something happens in the spirit of surrender, which doesn't feel good, where we become teachable. And that thing always told me, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And that's been my journey. That's all I got. Peace.